We're on to New England. Channel your inner Bill Belichick and just say, as a Bengals fan, we're on to New England. You got to move on. The Bengals suffered a tough loss to the Dallas Cowboys last Sunday afternoon, and they are reeling a bit at a 2-3 start to the season. Welcome to the Orange and Black Insider. My name is Anthony Cosenza, and I'm joined with Connor Howe. We might be joined by Scott Schulte later on. He's got some personal affairs he's tending to, so hopefully he can join us, but understandable if he can't. But Connor, how are you doing in the wake of a little bit of disappointment so far this season?
Yeah, it was a brutal loss, and the one thing I'll say is you're right. Marvin Lewis needed to throw in that onto New England. That just would have been the icing on the cake because it's just perfect because Belichick did it on his way to Cincinnati. It'd be so funny if Lewis did it on his way to New England.
Yeah, would add a little storyline, and for a guy like Lewis who's pretty buttoned up, it kind of would have been a different change of pace. I agree with you on that. Before we preview the Patriots game, and that's going to be a biggie. A lot of people are picking against the Bengals in that one, just because mostly of what they've seen last week with the Dak Prescott, the rookie tandem of Dak Prescott and Ezekiel Elliott really getting after the Bengals, and the Bengals were pretty much thoroughly dominated in all phases of the game. Let's review the Cowboys, the loss to the Cowboys, Connor. If you can, pick out your biggest disappointment this week, because there's a lot to choose from. So what's your biggest disappointment based on everything you saw in the Cowboys' domination of the Bengals?
Yeah, I mean, the offense was definitely frustrating, but I think the biggest disappointment for me had to be the front seven. You need to stop the run. Geno Atkins was nowhere to be found. And granted, he was going up against Zach Martin and Travis Frederick, who at right guard and center are probably the best players at their respective positions in the entire NFL. So, I mean, that's kind of understandable, but Domata Peko wasn't drawing double teams. Michael Johnson, I'm not going to pretend like I know everything I know about defensive line play. Like, I really don't know that much. But when the defensive line isn't making plays, and sure, Carlos Dunlap had a sack, but how many plays does the defensive line really make? And I mean, the commentators were very quick to point out the fact that Dunlap missed Dak Prescott bit on the run on the read option touchdown run. But he also had a couple plays where he jumped up. I think he batted a pass. He also jumped up and prevented Prescott from hitting Elliott on a screen pass. Or not a screen pass, but Elliott rolled out to the right, and Dunlap didn't throw it, but Dunlap made him not throw it pretty much. So, and just the linebackers in general, we all saw Ray Maluga's really bad coverage on Cole Beasley. Vinny Ray wasn't really doing anything. Vontaze Burfict had probably the worst game of his past 2 seasons, and Carlos Dansby didn't really provide that much. It was just an all around. Every single player in the front seven pretty much had a bad game. In terms of comparing them to what they usually do, however good or bad you think a certain player is. Domata Peko, for example, not everyone thinks he's great, but he wasn't drawing double teams last week the way that he usually does, which counts for something. I don't think everyone truly notices that, in that catching double teams as a nose tackle is kind of your job. So when you're not doing that, and it's so easy for Dallas to run in a game where that's their only weapon is to run the ball, you just can't do that.
So I want to ask you another question. Well, I'll ask it first, and then I'll get some positives from you. Do you think that in a game like this, I noted this in one of my posts in an analysis of the game shortly afterwards, do you think that the losses of Brandon Thompson, Marcus Hardison, Andrew Billings, in a game like this where they were going to run the ball, they were going to play, even though Michael Johnson said it was more zone blocking than true smash mouth running game, but they were going to try and run the ball a lot. Do you think that those guys, and being able to rotate in and out of the lineup in a situation like that, do you think that they would have come in and provided a big spark and maybe limited some of the damage, or do you think that it just wasn't the Bengals' day regardless?
I mean, I don't know. That's a good question to ask. And that was definitely, that was a really good observation on your part. I don't really think that many people really pointed that out. It definitely would have been nice to have more.
Hey, thanks, man.
It would have been nice to have more bodies. I mean, you just really don't know who's going to show up on any given day. And clearly even the starters and the backups, like none of the backups were really, I mean, they weren't playing poorly, but Will Clark bit so hard on one inside run that ended up being, I don't know if it was a reverse or read option or something, but I remember they ran to the left to Clark's side and he bit so hard. Like I've been saying all preseason, Clark, let me just say this about Clark. Clark is definitely a very improved player from when he first came into the league. He's a pretty decent pass rusher, but he bites so hard on the play action, on any inside fake. And when he does that, I'm sure other teams are game planning for it, because I've yet to see him not bite on something. So on like, it seems like other teams literally just try to get him on that every single game whenever they do it. So that was one definitely frustrating point, but it just, like, I mean, like I was saying earlier, I just think it was you just only have 53 guys on the roster and there's only so much you can do. I also think the biggest thing that I took away from your point was I'm interested to see what happens when Brandon Thompson comes off PUP, because he is a guy who I think is going to take up a roster spot, especially after we just saw what happened in Dallas. And who's going to, get the boot? Is Jeff Driscoll really going to be here for the whole season? Is, maybe the 6th or 7th linebacker or receiver, whatever it may be, is Clayton Fejedelem that important on special teams that he's going to stay when he's been inactive almost every single week? So that'll be interesting.
Yeah. I mean, the one I really struggle with is Billings. And, I had high hopes for him. I know it's hard to hang your hat heavily on a rookie, but I just kind of felt like he was a guy that really could have come in and been a rotational force for this team. And it's a real bummer that he got hurt this preseason, but shoulda, woulda, coulda. And the Bengals have who they have, and they needed to go out there and, play better football. One positive takeaway, if you can find one.
I think the positive for me, and I think it's going to transition eventually into something, is with Brandon LaFell. I know all of his numbers kind of came in garbage time, but and I feel like I've been beating this drum for a while now. When you look at the numbers head to head, Brandon LaFell versus Marvin Jones, or even Mohamed Sanu, it really doesn't matter. Brandon LaFell's had, in terms of statistics, he's had more catches, yards, and touchdowns through 5 weeks than Marvin Jones had last year, and Jones was healthy. So, I mean, obviously Eifert was on the field, and you can make the argument, oh, well, Eifert was consuming all of those targets. I think Jones only had 15 catches. But in the same sense, play better if Eifert's on the field as well. So, I mean, it kind of goes both ways. My major takeaway from this whole Brandon LaFell kind of breakout, if you will, if he's back to the guy he was pre-2015, where everyone said he's never going to get back to where he was. Last year, he dropped so many passes in New England. He's never going to get open. And don't take me wrong, he's not Marvin Jones. Like, it'd be awesome to have Marvin Jones on the team, but I had this theory before, Brandon LaFell got signed, in that whoever plays number 2 opposite AJ Green is going to get his targets. He's going to get his catches. He's going to get his numbers. And so far I'm not going to say I've been right, because it's only been 5 weeks, but I haven't been wrong yet. So it's been encouraging. And also just the fact that they got 2 touchdowns and 2 red zone appearances. I think that was huge. I know that that's not, super encouraging when you're down 21 points very quickly. And I don't know if it was 28-0 before they scored their first touchdown, but they got 2 red zone touchdowns. LaFell was making plays, and I mean, Green wasn't bad. He definitely needed to make more plays, but he drew 2 or 3 PIs and a couple like 1 or 2, 3, I think, total penalties, whether it was via PI or a hold on the defense. So, I mean, the receiver play, and obviously Andy Dalton is still Andy Dalton, which is something.
So I'll say my disappointment in this week's game was, it's hard to pinpoint one, but I'll say it seemed as if there was a lack of preparation by the coaches, and that's inexcusable coming off of a mini bye and extended time as the Bengals were on Thursday night. That to me is just inexcusable. There seemed to be a lack of effort at times, which really disappointed me. And really the thing that this game really came down to me, was the Cowboys were making every single clutch play that needed to be made, and the Bengals made none. And
they had no third downs on the first 2 drives. They didn't even have a third down. They scored that easily.
Right. And so, and later in the game, when the Bengals needed to stop, they hit Cole Beasley or Terrence Williams for a first down and extended the time, and the Bengals couldn't play catch up anymore after scoring a few points. You know, earlier in the game, they had 2 nice drives where they were kind of methodically moving. It wasn't anything, you know, any big wow plays, but they were getting first downs and moving the ball. Holding penalty on Kevin Zeitler stalls the drive out. They have to punt. Later in the third, that's at the beginning of the second quarter. Later in the third quarter, they're moving again, and it's a critical drive down. I believe they were down 21-0 or something at that point after the half. You know, they really needed to get something going and get some points on the board. Andrew Whitworth commits a holding penalty, drive stalls out, and then Ezekiel Elliott runs that touchdown in, you know, to go up 28-0.
Yeah, on the coffin into my heart.
Yeah, and it was. Sometimes there are teams that you play and it's just not a good matchup. It's not even though you might be evenly talented in terms of roster, all of that. I saw a lack of preparedness. I saw a lack of fire from this team. And, you know, every clutch play, I mean, even when they were scraping for 3 points on a long field goal, Mike Nugent misses that one. So it's like every single time that they were trying to do something right, it seemed to just bite them, and it just, you know, it was a real tough game to watch if you're a Bengals fan. Granted, they got those 2 touchdowns late and made it a little bit more watchable, but at the same time, they seem to be dominated in all 3 phases of the game, and you know,
you need to beat the teams you can beat.
Yep.
And I mean, like it or not, that was a team that the Bengals could have beaten.
Yes, really I agree, especially with Dez Bryant out, and you have a rookie quarterback. And, you know, a rookie running back, albeit, you know, a good one. I just feel like that was an opportunity for the Bengals to really assert themselves, and they didn't do it. So my positive, and we were going to use this segment, I'm going to segue it into a segment we were going to do later in the show. But since you kind of started talking about him a little bit, I'll agree with Jan Lefel that he was one of the bright spots really in the entire game. Andy Dalton played well despite a number of offensive line issues, really from almost every single player on that line. There was a tweet by Andy Benoit of Sports Illustrated. He noted that almost never in that game could Andy Dalton sit at the top of his drop and make the throw from the pocket. He had to scramble out. He had to bail out of his drop sometimes. So offensive line issues were a problem, but Andy Dalton did find Brandon LaFell. It was nice to see. Here's my thing, and the question for this segment, since we're talking about him, Brandon LaFell, yay or nay as a number 2 wide receiver on the Bengals? Well, I think he's kind of asserted himself as that number 2. Obviously, Tyler Boyd is taking a back seat, but is he as viable of an option as Marvin Jones and or Mohamed Sanu were in this offense? I say no, and it sounded like you say no as well, but I say no, and it's mostly because I don't see him, and there was a little bit of a Twitter discussion today we had on this, Connor. I don't see him getting consistently open, and I think
you're not wrong. You're not wrong.
I think that points to a little bit of you know, some predictability in play calling. I think that's also on LaFell. I think that's on the inability of the offensive line to provide good protection for Dalton to allow plays to develop. But I think there's a combination of factors at play, but that really is bothering me. And I think that's a major difference, not just on him either. Tyler Boyd's having some issues. And then obviously AJ Green is getting bracketed with coverage with Tyler Eifert out of the lineup. So I don't see him, even though the stats, as you mentioned, are better than Marvin Jones's throughout the beginning of last season. I don't see him as viable of an option. I do think that hurts the offense. What are your overall thoughts to extend on the ones you gave earlier?
Yeah, I mean, nothing you said was wrong. He's not the player Marvin Jones is. Marvin Jones leads the league in receiving. So if you're comparing stats this year, and I think one thing that a lot of Bengal fans are doing right now is in order to make the argument, oh, LaFell's so much of a drop-off from Jones, they're comparing, all right, well, look, Jones has, 400 yards and X amount of touchdowns this year, whereas LaFell has, 200 something yards or 300, 400, whatever, and two or 300 and 2 touchdowns. And I made a mistake earlier. Jones and LaFell both have the same amount of touchdowns, but LaFell did have more catches and yards through 5 weeks. And what I'll say is that, I mean, it kind of connects with my theory earlier, but the number 2 receiver, just in my opinion, is going to get his targets. He's going to get his catches. It would have been nice to have Jones, but it really, the first 5 weeks without Eifert, that would have really been huge to have Marvin Jones right now, just because you have AJ Green and kind of no one else. And LaFell had a great game in New York against the Jets. He had a great game this week. He's been okay the rest of the season. The one thing I'll say is that I just find it hard for anyone to argue against this, but so many people anticipated a major drop off from the offense with the departure of Jones and Sanu and Andre Smith, Hugh Jackson, whatever it is. And they weren't wrong in predicting that. But I think so many people place such an emphasis on Marvin Jones is gone. There's no number 2 receiver. And that's going to be the thing that kills the offense. And that's been far from the Bengals' biggest problem. Their number 1 problem is offensive line. Their number 2 problem is they have no Eifert. Their number 3 problem, or at highest, is probably LaFell. But number 3 is probably not having a running game. So
running game, yeah.
I would say LaFell, the drop off from Jones to LaFell at the most impactful is the 4th biggest change. So, or even, it's just, there's so many things going on, and it's easy to, say, oh, well, the Bengals got LaFell, who's playing at 2013, 2014 form for him at a $1 million a year deal for a 1-year contract. I'd be fine with him next year on that contract if he plays the slot and they find, or even if he plays number 2. I think that when Eifert comes back, I think it's going to really help LaFell. I think it's going to help the offense. Tyler Boyd shouldn't be on the field. He got open one time and Dalton couldn't find him last game.
Yeah, I don't know if I agree with he shouldn't be on the field, but I think there's a reason why.
He shouldn't be taking as many snaps as he is right now. He should be used in the lineup.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think and people might think I'm crazy for thinking this, but I actually don't think Marvin Jones is exponentially more talented than Brandon LaFell per se. I think it's more the rapport that Andy Dalton had with Mohamed Sanu and Marvin Jones was almost and obviously he still has it with AJ Green for the most part, even with the attrition this year. The rapport that trio had with Andy Dalton was unbelievable. Rarely did you find those guys out of position, especially last year. Even though Mohamed Sanu didn't have a receiving touchdown last year, rarely were those guys out of position, but they always seemed to move the chains. They all complemented each other well. Jones was kind of he towards the end of his Bengal career, he started doing the shorter routes and intermediate routes a lot better, but he was kind of the deep ball guy. AJ Green was the can do it all guy, and Mohamed Sanu was the guy that can move the chains. And I think the Bengals had hoped that they had a little bit of a semblance with that when they brought in LaFell and Boyd, but it just hasn't happened. And I'm optimistic in that as more time goes and they all kind of are acclimating to this new offensive coordinator, things are going to get better. It is nice that we saw some good things from LaFell, both in week 1 and then this last game as well. But there has to be a little bit more consistency, both in getting open and in week-to-week production from LaFell. So as of now, I actually think he's been a better pickup than I anticipated. I didn't anticipate a huge.
I don't think anyone thought he was going to be this good. Yeah. He hasn't been great. Don't get me wrong, but he's putting up numbers.
He's been okay to solid. I would say he's been decent to solid, and depending on what week you look at. So for now, I think he's a viable number 2. Obviously, the offense isn't doing the same things that they were under Hugh Jackson last year, but I think that's, as you mentioned, Connor, a myriad of topics and not so much just Brandon LaFell. So that's our take on Brandon LaFell. If you want to let us know your thoughts on him, you can contact us on the show in a variety of ways. Email, iTunes, Twitter, all that stuff. We're on Twitter. We're at BengalsOBI. As I mentioned, you can download us on iTunes. We appreciate all the feedback and all the downloads we've been receiving there. You can find us on SoundCloud and download us there if you have a channel or an account there. We have a channel there. You can email us at theobinsider@gmail.com, or you can just stream the show from the Cincy Jungle website itself and check out both the show in its entirety, and a lot of times we break up the show in segments so you can kind of check out little bits and pieces of the show that we do every week. But check us out. Leave us a review. Let us know also some questions you have or some comments. We love sharing that. We do take fan questions and comments on the show, so please keep those coming too. Let's look ahead to the Patriots game, and obviously pessimism is running very high right now in terms of the Bengals because of what happened last week. They now go to New England, a team that under Marvin Lewis, they've only beaten once, and it was at home in terrible weather. Granted, it was against Tom Brady, but it was a pretty ugly game. Was a big win for the Bengals regardless. But now it's kind of funny to me, Connor. Right now, the Bengals are in almost the exact situation that the Patriots were a couple of years ago when the Bengals went to Gillette and the Patriots were discarded as done and over, and they absolutely trounced the Bengals on national television. I don't know if that's going to play into this. It very well could. The Bengals could be utilizing, as ironic as it sounded, the Boston mindset of us against the world. Is there any way the Bengals win this game?
I mean, it is. I don't think it's a likely win, but you have the Bills beat him. I know it was a third-string quarterback in Foxborough, but they trounced them. The Patriots gave up like 17 points to the Bills, who weren't a great team at the time. So it's possible. It's just going to come down to matchups, and really the Bengals don't match up well. And so it's just going to take the team executing well, which we haven't really seen yet so far this season. I mean, when you look at the Patriots, they have Gronk, they have Martellus Bennett, and tight ends are really dangerous. The Bengals really haven't played any. The best tight end they've played is Witten. The next best tight end they played was, I couldn't tell you, probably Jesse James on the Steelers with Ladarius Green being out. So, and with tight ends running up the seams, especially with the Bengals loving cover 2, and granted they've been mixing in some cover 3 concepts, which I don't know if that has to do with the strong receivers they've been playing or if it's just Paul Gunther trying to mix things up on defense. But having to face 2 tight ends and a team that has a solid run game, and of course Tom Brady's the best quarterback in the NFL, I think, still right now. It's definitely an uphill battle, but it's a defense that you can beat. They're definitely not a bad defense. The Patriots don't have a bad defense. They're pretty loaded there too, but you have AJ Green and they have Devin McCourty's a great safety, but their corners are Malcolm Butler, Logan Ryan. They're both good. I wouldn't say they're both great. I mean, it's just scary. The Patriots have a better secondary than the Cowboys do. They have a better front 7 probably than the Cowboys do. They have better tight ends. There's not really much else I can say. It's a terrible matchup. The Bengals probably won't win, but it's still possible, I guess.
Okay, so obviously, Connor, tough matchup between the Bengals and the Patriots. Kind of a star-studded affair, actually, with both teams. I mean, even though more household names are with the New England Patriots, I mean, the Bengals have a number of talented players of their own. What is your key to this week's victory for the Bengals?
I mean, I don't think this is the number one most necessary thing that needs to happen, but I would love to see the safety play get better. And we saw in Miami the one play that really embodied the safety play this year, which was the whole Sean Williams manning up on Kenny Stills and him burning Sean Williams deep, Iloka making the wrong read. The safety play hasn't been what we all expected when, Iloka and Sean Williams both signed those massive deals. And Iloka, before the year, was a guy who was being touted as a potential top 10 player by Andy Benoit, who I think we mentioned earlier. He has the physical, he has the physical makeup of a guy who, at 6'4", I don't know how much he weighs, but he's an enforcer, and not only that, but he can cover ground in the passing game, and he's really all over the field. If anyone's interested, go watch the Rams game, because he was all over the place in that game. But he's a guy who's prototypically built to cover tight ends. He's one of the very few safeties, along with Byron Jones, who the Bengals just faced in Dallas, and then HaHa Clinton-Dix, and maybe a couple more, but he really has the size, the speed, and the range to cover a guy like Gronk. And not to say that Iloka's just going to shut him down, but we saw in New Orleans he really limited Jimmy Graham to a pretty poor game, and he eventually, I believe, took Graham out of the game with a pretty devastating hit, which was completely legal. So, I mean, you want to see Iloka get back onto his game because he was so good in 2014 and really good in 2015 too before injuries kind of marred away at his season. So I'd love to see him get back to where he was. Maybe it means throwing Durant Smith back there alongside Sean Williams and playing Iloka as more of a safety linebacker hybrid just for this week to see what happens. But you have two very capable, and I don't know, maybe it just means playing cover three with Iloka over top, and then Kirkpatrick and Jones back deep on the two sides, and but the thing is the Patriots are going to take advantage of the Bengals on underneath routes if the Bengals keep linebackers in coverage. So
Yeah.
it's really, I mean, I don't know. Maybe you go a lot of dime, maybe you play more nickel. They're going to play a ton of nickel, but maybe it just means, trying to get Sean Williams into a hybrid safety linebacker and then putting Durant Smith back into safety coverage, or just mixing things up. That's really what I think they need to do on defense, because last week was just such a poor performance, and it wasn't. I don't know if it was on the coaching or the players for not executing or what it was. They just need their swagger back. We saw with Drake Patrick's game in Denver in 2014 where he picked off Peyton Manning and it just energized the entire team. And you have Vontaze Burfict all over the place in Pittsburgh in last year's playoff game, and that reignited the team. You just need your swagger back, and I don't know. I think Iloka having a good game would really, really kick this team's energy up.
Yeah, I agree with you in terms of the safeties, and unfortunately, those two guys signed big contracts this year and haven't really lived up to that. Iloka and Sean Williams. I do think it'd be interesting to see what would happen if Taylor Mays was available and not suspended at this point, because he's a guy that seems to be also a physical specimen that, though he's not known as a good coverage safety, he is that linebacker safety hybrid that can run with the tight ends and might be able to.
Yeah, they were interested, so.
Yeah, that might be that would have been kind of interesting to see how if he would be going up against Gronk or Martellus Bennett, that sort of thing. But I do agree with you that tight end and or safety linebacker matchup is huge this week. I've got two, and I'm going to be a little cliche. One is in terms of being cliche is in the trenches, and the Bengals just need the one key in that win against the only win Marvin Lewis has against New England in I can't remember how many games they played. I believe it's about 5 or 6 at least at this point. The Bengals got to Tom Brady early, often, in all game. And you noticed even at the end of the game, even though it was poor weather, there was a lot of pressure, and Brady, for all of his Hall of Fame credentials that he has, the one thing that does get to him is pressure, and pressure from places that he doesn't necessarily expect it to come from. And that offense is built on timing. That offense is built on building a nice pocket for Tom Brady. And if the Bengals have the talent now up front to be able to disrupt that. And so far that unit has kind of underachieved at this point. So they're going to need to get creative up front and do some different things. Geno Atkins is going to have a monster of a game to make up for his poor performance against Dallas.
Yeah,
I hate to single him out because he wasn't the only one, but he's going to need he's the key to how that defensive line goes. And if
you need him on his game.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing, obviously the offensive line play on the flip side is big. They just need to play better. I mean, we've talked about that ad nauseum. Every single one of those guys need to play better. And, some of their stuff that they've been showing throughout the first 5 games this week has been pretty inexcusable. So the trenches is one area. The other thing is, especially on offense, don't get caught in the Bill Belichick chess match. Bill Belichick is a master. What he does is he likes to exploit matchups, and he likes to do things to quarterbacks. He likes to put them in situations and make them do things that they're not used to doing and make them use weapons that they're not necessarily comfortable with using. So obviously this week, and that was one of the huge things that always took place between Carson Palmer and Chad, is Belichick would more or less take Chad Johnson out of the picture. And he would say, okay, beat us another way. We're going to pressure you, and we're going to take Chad Johnson out of the picture. Beat us another way. So likely, with the struggles that this offensive line has had this year, there's going to be something similar going on in the offense there. And I think Andy Dalton's going to have to play a sharp game. The rest of the guys are going to have to start to get separation. And it would be nice to see Brandon LaFell in a homecoming have a big game. We talked about him earlier this show. It'd be great to see him step up and kind of take it to the Patriots haters that seemed to be pretty prevalent when the Bengals signed him this offseason. So those are our keys to victory. You can let us know your keys to victory on the many platforms that we're on. We mentioned it earlier in the show, iTunes, SoundCloud. Hit us on email, theobinsider@gmail.com, Twitter @BengalsOBI. Check us out there or on Cincy Jungle, and appreciate all the feedback and your comments and questions. Let's move on to and obviously it's easy to ask this question. It's kind of a portion of our what if segment, I guess, since it's a hypothetical question, but it rings true right now based on not only the litmus test that Dallas was, and the Bengals failed that test, obviously, but the one that is the even bigger one that's coming up with New England this week. Really simply put, Connor, do you believe at this point in time that the Bengals are a playoff team?
Yeah, I think that's going to surprise some people, but you just have to take every factor in consideration. And let's just say, I don't know if we said this last week, but devil's advocate scenario, okay, Denver, Oakland, AFC South team, whether it be the Texans, Colts, Titans if they pull off something crazy, and then Patriots are going to be in the wild card. Or those are the 5 teams. And then you've got the Bengals, Chiefs, Ravens, Bills, and potentially a second AFC South team, either the Texans, who I'm not buying at all, or the Colts, who I'm also not buying at all, as the potential competition. And no matter how poorly the Bengals have played, and let's not forget, their 3 losses have come to teams that have 4-1 records. They're still a good team. It pains me to have to go against the grain. Actually, I mean, it doesn't, because I like to disagree with people, but I'm not trying to be like a homer or an optimist or anything. I mean, the Bengals are better than the Ravens. The Ravens have been playing really bad. I think they're on a 2-game losing streak where they lost to Washington and some other like okay team.
Oakland, I think, maybe.
Yeah, Oakland. Yeah. And Oakland's 4-1, but I'm not buying them either. And so, and who knows, maybe I should be buying
them. They're a 4-1 team by like a combined like 6 points margin of victory or something. I mean, it's insane.
Yeah, them and the Oakland, who knows? Maybe they drop off. Maybe Denver drops off without Simeon. I mean, we saw last week they weren't great with Paxton Lynch. I know Simeon's going to come back, but who knows, man? There's so many factors to consider. The Bengals have such an easy schedule over the second half of the season, and they're such a streaky team that it just makes sense. Even if they go 2-4, last year the Chiefs were 1-5 and they made the playoffs, and they won a playoff game. So anything's still possible. It's so early in the season. The Bengals last year won 8 games in a row. The year before, I believe they won something like they went 5-1 over a stretch and 6-2 over a stretch, or maybe that was 2013. The second half of 2012, after they had a terrible start, they went 7-1. They went perfect at home in 2013 with an 8-0 record, and I know that's already broken. And they're also playing a home game in London, which everyone's flipping out about, but the Bengals have a playoff caliber roster. They have Dalton. They have 2 running backs who, when they're playing well, and hopefully they'll play well at some point this year, they're like one of the best running back duos in the NFL. They have AJ Green, who's an elite wide receiver. That's not crazy to say Green's elite. He is. Geno Atkins, an elite interior defensive lineman. Carlos Dunlap is looking more and more on a weekly basis like an elite edge rusher. So they have the personnel to do it. They shouldn't be quick to the gun and fire Zampese. That would just kill their team. I wrote a very comprehensive piece on offensive line, and it really just came down to I just think they need to simplify things. We saw in Buffalo, they fired Greg Roman, and Anthony Lynn, their offensive coordinator, rattled off 3 straight wins with just calling. He said, I believe, something around half the plays that Greg Roman was calling. He just simplified the playbook for his team, and it made things easier. And with a guy like Tyrod Taylor at quarterback, it makes sense for them to simplify the playbook. For the Bengals, you have a guy like Cedric Ogbuehi starting at right tackle, and it's not all the struggles are on him. Not all the struggles are on anyone in particular on the offensive line, but Andrew Whitworth isn't playing like the alien or whatever it was that you want to call it. He wasn't human for the past 3 years. He was virtually perfect, and now he's getting called on penalties and not completely boxing his guy out of every single play. Zeitler's having the worst year of his career, and Russell Bodine is having the best season of his career. But people are still saying, "Oh, well, Bodine sucks," and he'll make a couple bad plays here and there, but he's been a lot more consistent, which I think is easy to forget. The bottom line is no one is executing well, and that's just on as much on the players as the coaches, and I think it's on the coaches right now to just put the 5 games they've played in the rearview mirror. You're not going to get any of those games back. Just make things easy on the team. Make things easy on Cedric Ogbuehi, who is a first-year starter. You have Tyler Boyd, a first-year starter. Brandon LaFell, first year in the Bengals offense. There hasn't ever been so much turnover, I believe, in the Dalton era on at least on offense. And so just make things easy, make the players' jobs easier. I don't care if it makes you a more predictable team, because last year the Bengals were one of the most unpredictable teams with Hugh Jackson, that offensive coordinator. And that their unpredictability wasn't what made them a great team. Their execution and making good plays when it mattered made them a good team. So they're a team who I think can beat the Chiefs, they can beat the Bills, they can beat the Ravens, and they'll have games against the Bills and the Ravens. They'll have 2 games against the Ravens and 1 against the Bills, so they really do control their own destiny. And with an easy second half of the schedule, I'm still not buying Philly as a team they're just going to automatically lose to. So it's possible, and I think right now, as someone who's an optimist, I think it's more likely than it is possible.
So, Connor, I'm a little bit older than you, and I've seen a lot with the Cincinnati Bengals. And so it's easier for me to be a little bit more pessimistic than you, who has seen.
I've only heard. I haven't seen.
Well, no, I mean you have seen 7 postseason appearances under Marvin Lewis. I mean you've probably experienced that in your fandom. So, but I'm going to say a couple of things. Going into this segment, I was dead set on saying no. I don't think it's a playoff team. You have changed my mind a bit based on some of the things that you said, but also I'm looking at the schedule, and it is quite favorable after this week. And side note, you mentioned your post that about the offensive line. You did a very nice job on that, and I think our Cincy Jungle's John Sheeran did another one.
Yeah, he's really, really good.
Mistaken. Both of you guys did a good job on those posts, and I want to encourage our listeners to read those if they haven't yet. But so you look at from week 7 to week 14. So you're talking, 8 total weeks, right? You've got the Browns at home. You've got the Redskins in Europe. You've got the bye week. You're at the New York Giants, who have been mediocre at best. You've got the Bills.
Lost 2 in a row.
Right. You've got the Bills.
I think yeah.
You've got the Bills, who you mentioned made a change and have been resurgent. I still don't find them overly impressive. You're at Baltimore, which is a team that I believe the Bengals have gone 7-1 against over the last handful of years. And their only loss was in overtime at Baltimore. So
yeah, after they evened it out on a Hail Mary, which is crazy. I don't know. That was a crazy game.
And then they host the Eagles with a rookie quarterback, and then they're at Cleveland again. So I mean, theoretically, there's maybe 2 losses in there.
And I'm pretty sure I did the numbers. I'm pretty sure 7 out of the 10 teams they have yet to play after the Patriots are on 2-game losing streaks or worse.
That's a great stat. And you know what else is that you mentioned the combined teams they have lost to are 4-1 each, so 12-2 currently in those 3 losses, and that's
crazy.
On one hand, I see it and I go, I understand. Those are good teams. You lost to good teams. On the other hand, I keep going back to the argument I've spit out for a number of years. And in order to be a great team and in order to do well in the playoffs, you have to start beating those types of teams. So
you need to, yeah.
Yeah. So hopefully the Bengals start gaining some ground here. And if it begins with New England this week, awesome. If not, there's still a lot of ground to be made up in the middle of their schedule, and hopefully at that point not only do the new pieces begin to gel, but the team gets healthier. Tyler Eifert's back, that sort of thing. He might be back this week. We don't know. Again, he missed practice Wednesday. We mentioned that earlier, but we'll see there. So,
and one more thing I just wanted to point out. I mean, the Bengals lost William Jackson. They lost Billings for the year. They lost Pearman. I mean, all 3 of those losses are going to hurt, right? Like Pearman's loss, especially on special teams, has been the most the least talked about issue of the entire year, but special teams has been an absolute disaster aside from Nugent and Huber, and even those two guys have had their moments. But the one thing I want to say is they're healthy, which counts for something, because last year they had this amazing year where no one could get hurt, and obviously Eifert's going to come, and Eifert's hurt, but we know he's coming back, or at least we hope he's coming back. That you have a healthy Green, a healthy Dalton, pretty relatively healthy defense, even with the corners coming back from injuries. It doesn't seem as though anyone's really dinged up. Geno Atkins and Carlos Dunlap are both healthy. You've got Burfict returning from suspension. I don't know who said it, but I heard this saying one time, or maybe it's a very common saying, but the healthiest team is the team that wins the Super Bowl. And last year, the Broncos, the only significant loss they had was they lost their left tackle, Ryan Clady, and he was out for the year by the time week 1 started. So at least you have the season to develop that continuity with your teammates. And on the other side, Carolina lost Kelvin Benjamin for the year, but aside from him, they really didn't lose that much either. And so on the bright side, they're healthy, which is, obviously you hope Eifert comes back this week, and it's so hard to not think about, oh, maybe this is the Marvin Jones year of 2013 where they keep saying it's going to come back and he doesn't come back. But it counts for something. They're pretty healthy. They're healthy compared to most other teams. Look at the Chargers, who their entire roster is already decimated.
Right. And I'm going to channel, just to kind of end this segment here, I'm going to channel my older brother, actually, who was telling me this throughout the beginning part of the season. And though we both are a little bit sour on the Bengals at this point, he had said numerous times, given especially what happened last year against the Steelers in the wild card game and how the Bengals kind of got off to that 8-0 start, then kind of stumbled down the stretch. He keeps telling me, the key to this team is you want them to be playing better as the year goes on and not necessarily at the beginning. And the last few years, we've seen hot starts and stumbles down the stretch. This year, we've seen stumbles at the beginning, and hopefully that it does with the talent they have. And again, we talked about the gelling of the new parts on this team, the new coaches on this team, as well as Eifert coming back, like Connor mentioned. Hopefully that points to the Bengals playing better as the year goes on and as the games get more important later in the year. So that's our take on the Bengals potentially being a playoff team. I didn't really give an answer at this point. I will say that I'm a bit more optimistic now that I've heard some things from Connor and I looked at the schedule.
Glad I can help.
Yeah, I'm kind of fence riding at this point. I think
it's still hard. It's still so hard because you're looking at probably 2-4, and that's just
it's a big hole to dig out of. Yeah, it's a big hole to dig out of.
But they went 7-1 at the end of 2012 with what I think is the worst roster, and obviously you had Zimmer there, but people are quick to jump ship on Paul Guenther. He had a great year last year, so hopefully the ship turns around for him and his defense.
Yeah. So on that note, then Connor, give me a prediction on how this Sunday's game plays out and a score.
I got to roll with Cincinnati every week. If I was an impartial third party, I'm taking Patriots every single day. But this is a game the Bengals can win. I think if they do win, which is a big if, they're going to get it done 17-14.
Wow. Okay.
I think it's low scoring. I think that the Patriots have that offense, but I think they're gonna try to run it. If I'm Belichick, I'm running the ball on the Bengals until they stop me, because number one, if it doesn't work, you have Gronk, and number two, there's a good chance it works.
Yeah. So I can't go with them this week. I really can't, and I wish I could. I really wish I could, but their history against Tom Brady and Bill Belichick is awful. Marvin Lewis's history and this team's history against that crew is awful.
Gillette Stadium is impossible to win at.
It's a difficult venue. It's a difficult venue. I do think the Bengals make a game of it, and I do think that the Bengals have the potential to make this kind of a miracle win that turns around their season. Don't get me wrong. They have enough talent to do that. I just don't see it. I see them. I see that this is another good team that the Bengals just can't get past, even though it's not in prime time. I would love for them to prove me wrong. I would love for this to be a feather in the cap of Marvin Lewis and his Bengals head coach tenure. But
yeah, that'd be sweet.
Honestly, I think that this win would be.
It'd be the biggest of his career, probably.
It would be up there. I mean, it would be top 2 or 3, I think. There was a game against Green Bay a few years ago.
That was big, yeah.
That was a biggie.
The Denver game.
Denver game was a biggie, and then obviously the other win against New England just a couple years ago was
and the Steelers game 2012 was big too.
Yeah, so I mean, there's a lot of good ones, but if they are able to pull this off, that would be big. I'm going to go 27-17 Patriots, unfortunately. I think the Bengals make it a pretty close game, but I just think that Marvin Lewis, for all the things he does well, he is not Bill Belichick. He is not the wizard. He is not the statistician. He is not, kind of the creative mind that Bill Belichick is. And I just don't see it. I see that this game kind of comes down to that and not necessarily overall talent, unfortunately. So those are our predictions. Hopefully I'm wrong and Connor's right, but those are our predictions this week. We missed Scott Schultze this week. He is going, he's actually, I hope he doesn't mind me saying, he's in the middle of a house purchase. So he's obviously got his hands full on that. I had that happen a couple of years ago myself, and I know there is a ton of moving parts there. So Scott, we miss you, but get all that stuff done. We know that's more important, obviously, as is family. So make sure you get all that settled, and we'll have you back when you're ready, buddy.
Well, football is family, according to the NFL.
There you go. There you go. There you go. Again, check us out on iTunes. Download us. You can download us on SoundCloud. You can get in touch with us at theobinsider@gmail.com via email. You can follow us on Twitter at BengalsOBI, and you can watch the show and download the show directly on the Cincy Jungle website. Keep your eyes on all of the content that we have going up on that website. We've got a bunch coming up to preview this game, and keep your heads up. The Bengals could surprise us. The one thing we know about this team is to expect the unexpected, and everybody's expecting a loss this week, so maybe they might surprise us. You never know. For Anthony Cosenza, it would be sweet. For Anthony Cosenza and Connor Howe, thanks for tuning in, and let's keep our heads up the rest of the way. Hoo day.
Hoo day.